BJ's for everyone. Ben Johnson's in Chicago.
Wait, whoa. We're excited, Rob, but not so much that.
Yeah, and I think there's some things we're all kind of overlooking because everyone's just so happy about their BJ's.
That and more on this episode of the Halas Huddle.
Welcome to another episode of the Halas Huddle podcast. Here are your hosts.
The middle with the 15 to the 20, breaks free of the 25 to the 30, to the outside, 40, midfield, 40, 30 to the coast, 20, 15, Hester 5, touchdown Bears!
What is up, Halas Huddlers?
Huddle up!
It has been a while. Had a lot of things going on. I've been sick, so I might sound a little bit off tonight, but that's why we're one day off on the Ben Johnson news, obviously. Ben Johnson is officially, he didn't sign till today, right? If he didn't put pen to paper, there was a chance that maybe he could have backed out.
Get a Dave McGinnis to this thing.
Yeah,
that's right.
So bear it up.
So Ben Johnson comes to Halas Hall, signs everything today. He is locked in. Rumors are that it's a 6-year deal worth roughly $15 million per year. So the McCaskies pulled out the pocketbook and wrote a damn check. I can't believe it.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it's hard to believe. And that's the thing is, we're going to talk in this episode some of the reasons why we're still cautiously optimistic. But they always say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, they actually did it different this time. And I think that's something we're going to talk about today. And I definitely also want to talk about some comparisons people naturally are going right into as disgruntled Bears fans that really aren't suitable in this situation.
Yeah, and my biggest takeaway from all this is just, it really started after Thanksgiving when they fired Eberflus, right? Things this organization has not done before that they did, and it transferred into this coaching search. They're just really happy to see something different happening, and so now maybe you actually are able to hope for a different result.
Yeah, things have definitely changed. I will say, because we weren't able to record as much, and I take full blame for me not getting these out. I actually had created these slides to do pros and cons for every, coaching candidate that I felt was worthy of being noted. Right. So I had Joe Brady on there. I had Mike McCarthy. I had Todd Monken. I had all these slides pulled up. Well, of course I did one for Ben Johnson too. So we're going to find a way to use it. We're going to throw up his pros and cons, just briefly mention those, but then we're going to dive into the reasons maybe why Ben Johnson will work in Chicago and the reasons why maybe he won't work in Chicago.
Hold on, Rob. You can't just simply fall on the sword like you are the reason we didn't record. I'll put my hand up, but here's the thing. I didn't even want to talk about it because it was exhausting just hearing the same thing over and over again. But now, seeing how it all played out, I kind of do have a different perspective on it. And again, it's just, this is not the Bears I'm used to. Because they didn't need to bring in outside help to find out who the candidates were. They cast a wide net, but it's possible they knew all along Ben Johnson's locked in on us, we're locked in on him, and let's get some intel, and let's, we've sucked for a very long time. Let's talk to people who haven't sucked, who are up and comers or have been around. Gather intel. You never know how or when you'll need that. And you got your guy, you got the guy that everyone around the league is pretty excited about.
Yeah, and let's be fair to ourselves as well. We probably assumed the Bears were just going to Bears this thing and just take forever and do something stupid anyway. And 2, we really had no idea that Ben Johnson was actually going to be available. This was probably, if we recorded this week, it would have been the coaching preview episode, but instead we actually hired him. I kind of made that joke Saturday after the loss, oh my gosh, I can't believe Ben Johnson's going to get hired on Monday. And then, you said, no, it won't be till Wednesday. And I said,
that's what I was told.
I didn't say the Bears were going to hire him Monday. Some other smart team was going to hire him Monday. And it turned out the Bears were that smart team who just said, you know what? Yeah, today's the day. We're going to hire this guy.
Yeah, so I was told Wednesday was the soonest that was probably going to happen. My guess is that the Raiders were really pushing hard. And they just got on the phone with Ben Johnson. Look, they nailed this deal down over the phone. He didn't come in person. There was no second in-person interview. He flew in today. That was the first time that they saw him in person at Halas Hall already as the head coach. If you haven't seen it yet, you can check it out on pretty much every social media site the Chicago Bears have, but they have that whole introductory thing coming in. All right, well, I'm going to throw this up there again. Going into it, these are just the pros and cons that I had for Ben Johnson. Obviously, he's got a great offensive mind. His play calling has been fantastic for Detroit. He's adaptable. Like, he's got great adaptability. He makes changes on the fly throughout games. He'll adapt to, if guys go down and he puts players in, and he'll adapt his offense to fit those players' strengths, and obviously QB development. So we saw Jared Goff as a not horrible quarterback with Sean McVay with the Rams, but they obviously didn't like what they saw with him. They traded for Stafford, won a Super Bowl, so it was a good trade for them. Jared Goff has been extremely better until this last playoff game when he had a horrible day. But the Lions have been top 5 basically in every offensive category for the last 2 years. Some of the cons, obviously, he's a first-time head coach, so we don't know how he's going to be as a head coach. Can he be that CEO type? Who knows? Experience, obviously, not just as a head coach, but like his NFL coaching experience isn't that deep. He's only been around the league for less than 10 years in coaching. And we don't know how he's going to handle the locker room. Is he going to be that buddy guy where it felt like Eberflus was and he wasn't, paying attention to the details and giving the guys direction? Or is he going to be that detail-oriented guy and going to keep everyone on check? Who knows how it's going to play out? And then I put it on here. He was outperformed by Cliff Kingsbury in the playoff loss. Let me tell you something with that, though, really quick. Ben Johnson, this is for the Lions fans out there who are crying on social media right now. They hate Ben Johnson now. They say he's a horrible coach. He's now enemy number one. He never should have, left them as Benedict Arnold, right, type, where he just stayed within the NFC North. Like, all of those things that are on social media from Lions fans. I love it. I'm laughing at it. We'll see if it plays out for us, though, because Chicago Bears win the offseason a lot. The offseason doesn't always work out in the regular season, but their defense is the main reason why they lost that game. It was not, and the turnovers by Goff. That's not on play calling. That's not on the coach. I will say the one play call that might have went against him was the interception by the receiver. I can't think of his name.
Jameson Williams.
Thank you. Williams, yeah. That might be the only one, right?
Might not look so bad if it wasn't for Goff's 4 other turnovers, right?
Correct.
That just kind of stood out on an island of a risk that just didn't work out. Then,
5 turnovers. They still had 400 plus something yards and only lost by 10. I was pretty shocked by that.
Yeah.
Well, real quick, though. I see experience on the cons, but I think you are selling him a bit short on experience when it comes to the consistency at which he's having this success. And one of the things I've been hearing that I feel like needs to be called out is comparing Ben Johnson as a hot offensive coordinator candidate as if it was the same thing as Nagy. It's a very different situation. And that's not, I don't want to go too deep on Nagy and go against him. But Ben Johnson, as you show here, has led this offense consistently over 3 years to be a top 5 offense. And has experience beyond that, actually a wide range of experience, working as a tight ends coach, working as a receivers coach, working as a quarterbacks coach. And the thing I want to take a deeper dive on, and we don't have to do it right here, or maybe we could, is specifically as experience with a tight end coach, seeing what you do with Laporta. I don't think Komet's quite at that level, but he was a forgotten man on this team this year, and you need to incorporate that. But they specifically talk about tight end coaches really are the deepest divers on the offense. Tight ends have to be part of blocking. So you're really focused on what the offensive line is doing, but they're also running routes. And so you're also looking at play concepts from that perspective. And so I went and looked, I was like, who are the coaches, head coaches who were tight end coaches? So here's the list of current coaches: Andy Reid, Sean McVay, John Harbaugh, Dan Campbell, Kevin Stefanski, Brian Dable, and Ben Johnson. What do you think of that list?
It's a pretty good list.
Pretty good list, yeah.
And so I think he is this detail-oriented guy. I think he's seen a lot of different aspects of offense and has deep experience. And I think what it really came down to is the Bears have a pretty attractive job available, and he wanted that job, which I'm sure Lions fans don't like. I mean, they're going to lose their DC too. So this is beautiful in a way that you're bringing in what you think is going to be a very positive thing for you with much better coaching, a young guy who can work with Caleb Williams and grow this thing right into what is a perennial competitive team. And you're taking that away from one of your division rivals. So that's even sweeter. But just wanted to kind of throw that list of names out there to hear that. And that's a pretty good list, I think.
It's a great list. I just want to kind of touch on the Nagy thing as well. Like, this is a completely different situation. I mean, one, like Ben Johnson's running his own offense, whereas Matt Nagy, like he was calling plays towards the end, but I mean, it wasn't his offense. He was calling plays in someone else's offense. So right off the bat, that's just a different thing. And two, you just look at the contract demands between the two guys when they're first hired. They're completely different stratospheres as candidates of head coaches. So they're just not the same thing at all.
And part of why he came here was Caleb Williams. Nagy was kind of like, yeah, I could get on board with Trubisky. It wasn't like he's my guy. I'm coming here for Trubisky.
Regular listeners who have heard me talk about this coaching search before know that I'm not all about just chasing an offensive guy for the sake of getting an offensive guy. And I think Nagy was an offensive guy for the sake of getting an offensive guy. Like Ben Johnson is, the more and more I'm hearing about him, the more and more he's a serious football guy who happens to be a really, really good offensive coordinator. So, just totally different than Nagy in a lot of respects.
Can I throw something your way, Rob?
Yeah.
Another thing I think that's going to shift drastically to the pro side in just hearing now, I mean, you couldn't have known when you made this graphic, but knowing now what we know is this type of staff it looks like he wants to put together, I think is going to try to conceal or make up for some of the things he knows are his cons. So what do you want to say about the coaching search?
That's perfect timing, actually. So as we were talking, I just got a text from insider source Gary Rappaport, a.k.a. Gary Ross.
You know who I am, Ross.
Who, again, I'm going to say it's a rumor because it's not official yet, but it's pretty much been told to him that the OC is going to be the Lions, now former offensive line coach, Hank Fraley, which to me is a huge plus because that offensive line that they've put together up in Detroit has been absolutely fantastic over the last 2-3 years. And we know that Chris Morgan has not been able to do that here. So goodbye to Morgan. Let's bring in Fraley. That is exciting news.
It speaks exactly to what Bob is talking about, though. Like the level of the install is like it matters what the footwork is of our offensive line. We're going to run play action. Like timing will matter. And we don't have the personnel. I keep hearing that. Like, yeah, they don't have Detroit's roster. But you don't have a sorry, crappy roster either. And you have some assets in terms of free agent money and good draft picks. And it sounds like he's excited to work with Poles. Not that Poles was some kind of liability during this. We kind of talked him way, way down because we thought if this is going to hurt the chance of doing this search right, he should go. But we all still know he's done some things well and has the potential to do things well if things like this start happening. So it's very exciting to me.
Yeah, so I like that Fraley hire a lot, but I would just kind of caution one, like just because he did such an awesome job with the Lions offensive line doesn't necessarily mean that he'll do an awesome job. Like he took premier talented athletes and then made them great offensive linemen. Right now, with the way this roster is, that's not the case. The reason I really do like an offensive line coach coming and being the offensive coordinator, obviously won't be calling plays and things like that. It keeps the offensive line kind of a central focus of your offensive scheme. And I really like that part of it.
My thing is he was there for helping with the personnel decisions though, right? So like between now we got Ben Johnson, now we got Fraley, like those two should be able to put together a solid offensive line in the scheme of who you're bringing in from free agents, which we just heard today on CHGO. I don't know if either of you listened to it, but Field Yates was on there. He highly expects Trey Smith to reach free agency and not be paid by the Chiefs. So go get that guy. And then the upcoming draft.
Are you waving that off, Justin?
No, he's sending the money.
Give him as much as he needs, as much as he wants.
Yeah, I mean, you got to pay up to get him. He's probably not the best offensive guard in the entire league, but he's going to have to be paid like it. And
oh my gosh, that would make a huge difference.
And you're talking, they got $80 million to spend, right? So just go spend a little bit of that, please. So then the other name that's been thrown out there, Adam Schefter said that Dennis Allen, the former head coach, former defense coordinator of the New Orleans Saints, is probably the leading candidate in that regard. So if that gets locked down, as another good defensive coach, that's a pretty good staff, and that was one of my concerns.
And he's a former who will never be a future.
Right. Had we done a coaching preview episode, that would have been what I would have talked about, bringing in coordinators. One, the offensive coordinator for Ben Johnson had to be a guy that he worked with before. I think that's probably the most important thing. Don't bring in, we saw it here before, bring in somebody you haven't worked with before because you're going to share different ideas and stuff, and then it just never actually works. So bring in somebody you worked with before. And then on the defensive side, let's get a previous head coach who's probably not entering that realm again, but who's a good defensive coordinator. I mean, he's a good defensive coordinator. I mean, it's kind of like the Spagnuolo thing with the Chiefs, right? He was a good defensive coordinator, went to be a head coach. It wasn't great, and now he's back to just being a great defensive coordinator and happy being so. So hopefully that's what we get out of Dennis Allen.
How about one more topic before we take a quick break? I think when you talk, obviously, first-time head coach, we don't know that this could or will work. But when you look at some of the people who it's worked for, like Kevin O'Connell, LaFleur maybe, and then Sean McVay, obviously those are some of the best case scenarios. But like Sean McVay, when he came in, did exactly what we're talking about. He brought in I think Wade Phillips was his DC, a coach that had coached a lot of games but wasn't going to get another head coaching job. And then I don't remember he brought in another former head coach to fill out that staff, to make up for the lack of experience. I believe they went to the playoffs in the very first year.
Yeah, definitely. Wade Phillips, I think. Did you say Wade Phillips?
That was as the DC.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's a good model to follow. We'd love to see it here.
100%. All right, let's take a quick break. Before we do, please subscribe to the show. If you are excited about Ben Johnson being the head coach of the Chicago Bears, you need to subscribe right now. Right now, hit the subscribe button. We want this show to take off. Please give us some support. Hit that subscribe button. And then also, if you are looking to bet on the Bears, I know Justin and Bob mentioned in our pre-show that the line changed for the Chicago Bears headed to the Super Bowl after the Ben Johnson news, right? So if you want to make some odd, bets, your odds could get worse for you as Ben Johnson continues to elevate this team, right? You might have better paying odds now. Head on over to our sign-up page sponsored by BetStamp at signupexpert.com/huddle, and you'll find all the best odds and sport books in your region. While you do that, enjoy this break.
And we are back. Halas Huddle, Bears hired Ben Johnson. Super exciting news. We were talking pretty glowingly, I would say. A lot of roses in the first part of the show. But as you can tell, man, you bring me in, we get this negative slide up. Rob, what's up with that?
You can blame me for the slide. That's all right. That's
you could have had a close-up of me first, and then we go to that. But all right.
There's no candidate that is perfect, except for maybe you, Justin.
Ah, shucks. So we are going to talk a little bit. Hey, let's try to see this whole thing through. What could be some of the pitfalls, or why might this still not work out?
Yeah, I mean, we're having this conversation 3 years from now and it didn't work out. Is there anything that we can point to now? Maybe we did miss that. And I think the first and most obvious one is that still is a George McCaskey hire, right? Just nothing this guy touches works. We don't even know really if Kevin Warren is working or not. Maybe this is signs that it is working. We talked at the very top of the show that new things are happening, firing coaches mid-season, going all out for a new, head coach, unproven head coach, being aggressive when it was time to be aggressive. So maybe things are changing, but at the end of the day, I mean, this is a George McCaskey hire. How much faith do we have that the same group of people who hired the last few cycles of coaches got this one right? When I said the last few cycles of coaches, I mean the offensive coordinators last year, and then keeping Eberflus around. That same brain trust made this decision. We trust that.
Can't trust it until you see the results.
Yeah, they've just done nothing to earn the benefit of the doubt.
And my only retort was going to be the Kevin Warren factor, but as you said, do we truly know what level that's been? But it just feels different and seems different, so I want to give them a little bit of grace on that.
Here's two things. One, when it comes to this, though, I do have the sense of if it fails, I'm not going to blame the Bears because I think this was the guy you had to go get. Everyone wanted him who had a coaching spot available. This was the guy you had to go get. They got the job done. I'm not going to blame them retroactively just because it didn't. I know a lot of fans, especially on social media, 1 year will go by and then we'll be like, oh, this is the worst hire ever. And the media will be all over him in mid-season because things aren't going right. So
I agree that this is the guy we want. I'll go so far as to say we got the quarterback we all wanted last year. We got the coach we all wanted this year. So if that still doesn't work, I think that that's even more reason to point the finger directly at the top of the organization, that it's George McCaskey. It just can't work under this.
We will have to, but I think what you're saying, Rob, is like I'm not going to retroactively say that I didn't think this was the right move.
Correct. Now, like I didn't support it, right? But obviously I do. Now, the other thing that I can tell that's changed is I was listening to the radio today, and there was a guy who was from Detroit who covers the team, and I don't remember the guy's name. I apologize, but he was talking about if people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, he being Ben Johnson is not afraid to cuss you out. And when I heard that, I was like, things have changed inside Halas Hall because George McCaskey would not have hired him if he heard that were those things coming out of the press, out of the other locker room. Somebody's pulling the strings over there. And to your point, Bob, I think maybe it might be just a Kevin Warren, Ryan Poles situation.
Yeah, and kind of that, there was the video today, and there's that little joke. The first thing that Ben Johnson said to the entire company was, get back to work.
Yeah.
And I know it was kind of a joke, but I honestly, behind every joke, there's just a little bit of something serious and true there. And I think he really was looking around like, aren't you people working right now? What are you doing? And so I like that. He's not afraid to say it. And, we've also said, I know this slide says why he won't work, right? Maybe I'll save what I'm going to say for the next part, but I liked that video today, a lot of what I saw in it.
All right, so why is Johnson wanting to come to Chicago a reason it won't work?
Here's the next thing. We know what kind of dumpster fire this organization is. It's very publicly out there just what a mess everything was. How Eberflus was retained and then how he was fired was somehow a bigger disaster than even keeping the guy around in the first place. And this is – and that's just some of it. There's so much other weird things that happen with this franchise continuously over and over and over again, failure. And here, Ben Johnson, more or less, I don't think the Bears, convinced Ben Johnson to come. I think Ben Johnson, within the first 5 minutes of the interview on Monday, said, I want to come to Chicago. So this is him saying, I don't care about these other positions. That organization that's a complete mess is where I want to go. So do we trust this man's judgment?
We got to say, though, the other two teams that were in the running also have very disorganized.
Well, that's what I was just about to say. I said jobs come open for a reason. I mean, you look at the organizations where you want to be, and they're all locked in on their coaches, and hopefully that's what this will be soon. But, that was one of the reasons why, again, had this not happened so fast and we were doing this not knowing if they were going to land Ben Johnson, he was becoming my number one for sure. And I was like, man, I know the Raiders are in this, but he should see the Bears as better than the Raiders as a job to land in. And then I'm thinking, you also have Mike McCarthy as a backup. And if his other option is the Saints, he should see the Bears as a much better option than the Saints. And so I was starting to feel, I didn't want to go as far as Kevin Warren and say, this is the best job there could ever be and all this stuff, because it's not just that. In this coaching cycle, it's the job that I think a coach would want. So it all worked out perfectly, I guess. But yes, his judgment should be questioned, I guess.
And what he said it 3 times in that video today, this is where we wanted to be. Are you sure?
Part of that could be a family thing, sure? Stay in the Midwest and he's raising a family. We don't think about that side of things, but it's part of it.
I think Caleb Williams had a lot to do with it as well. There was a picture of his kids in the locker room, and they were sitting in front of Caleb Williams' locker. I don't think that was like not important. I think it was just another way of showing, like, look, you're one of the reasons why I'm here. Let's go get this thing done.
I'm picturing like turn the light, or we need different light, and then now it's Amagaji's locker. Not a story.
Hey, maybe Hank Fraley makes Amagaji work. Who knows? Maybe he is a worker.
He's got the size and the traits. It's just he can't put it together. So,
and that was invested capital. That was a third-round pick. That was a third-round pick, guys.
Yeah. All right. So the next point here is like Detroit just had everything Ben Johnson needed to succeed, right? There was a power structure there where there was a president of football operations. There was a GM and firm control of what he wanted to execute. There was a head coach who was putting his vision out there, running that locker room, controlling the the projecting his own image onto the team. He had an awesome offensive line. He had a veteran quarterback, and he had weapons. All Ben Johnson had to do was be a competent offensive coordinator. And it turns out he's a really good offensive coordinator, turned into the best offensive in the league. But he had everything else going for him, where all he had to do was focus on the one thing of being offensive coordinator. And that is not going to be the case here in Chicago, not just because of all the other head coaching responsibilities, but just because of all the other things that he had in Detroit that aren't here in place to run an effective offense.
I think there's weapons, though. I think Chicago has obviously better weapons than the other options that he had.
Correct.
Jacksonville, maybe you could have been close with. I mean, they have, obviously a really good wide receiver there. Trevor Lawrence should be a good quarterback. The running backs aren't awful. The Raiders really have nothing.
Nothing.
I got nothing good to say about them. I'm sorry.
I think that shows that Ben Johnson's not patient, and I like that. I think he's ready to come in and be serious about winning right away and not wait 3 years. He didn't want to do with Dan Campbell. Won 5 games his first year in Detroit. I don't think Ben Johnson wanted to do that. Well, I think that's why he skipped on the Washington job. Actually, it just turned out that Washington might have been a little bit closer than maybe he thought. Obviously, knocked him out of the playoffs, but that's why I did do the Raiders, I think.
So, I feel like this hire is really boosting my morale as a Bears fan and is going to help the Halas Huddle. But there were some dark times recently, boys, where we started using bear as a verb, like, there they go burying again. But it wasn't that long ago that it was called lioning. And so he was there when it was lioning and watched it become what it is now. And so he seems like he's the type of person that he's taking that all in. And he was patient, but also knows when to pounce. So it's like it's a little bit of both, because he's been coveted as a potential head coach candidate over years and kind of paced himself for what he thought was the right opportunity. And again, he wanted Chicago, I guess, but maybe he's a crazy man. I don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah, and then the last thing is something that everyone's already said. It's a first-time head coach. It's something that this just comes with the territory. This isn't, I think, it's a fair criticism, but it's not something that you like when 3 years we're like not talking about now, right? Everyone knows that there's more to being an offensive coordinator, more to being a head coach and just coordinating the offense, right? So how is he going to handle all that? And I'll just go back to my kind of, refrain every time we talk about the coaching search is I'm not interested in just finding an offensive coordinator because you need an offensive coordinator. You guys know what the top 5 teams this year in EPA per play were?
Ravens?
Yeah.
Eagles?
Eagles were 6th, I believe.
Okay. So Ravens, you said?
Yep.
Are you telling
Washington?
us Lions weren't?
Washington.
Okay. Bears.
It's Buffalo, Baltimore, Washington, Detroit, Tampa Bay. None of those teams have an offensive head coach.
Interesting.
Like, it's not required.
There you go.
Chase the offensive head coach to have a good offense in the NFL. I know that
it's all the people that everyone else wants to hire, though.
And Reed and Mahomes, like that's a big deal. And of course, McVay won the one Super Bowl that Mahomes hasn't won. Like I get that there's these why it's there, but it's not required. Having the leader is required. And now the more I've learned about Ben Johnson, especially these past 48 hours, I'm understanding what kind of leader the guy actually is being sold to be. We'll see if he actually is. So it's a lot more than I knew about him, say, than I did this time last week. But just because he's a good offensive coordinator I'm willing to just say he's going to come in and be a good head coach, motivating that locker room, managing the game, preaching accountability, all those kind of things that a head coach needs to do. He came from a very, beneficial environment for what he had to do. Sure, maybe he sees what it looks like, but that doesn't mean that he's going to be able to, execute it himself.
So, Bob, you probably just stumbled upon the exact data category that they're going on to decide who are the eligible candidates for head coaching jobs, huh? Those people you all named are the people everyone's trying to hire, right?
Right. And the
OCs of all those teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Just to go fail as head coaches, though?
I mean, we'll see how many, maybe this is what we'll look back in 3 years from now is how many of those offensive coordinators, Tampa Bay, did I say, Liam Cohen is the other one.
Well, he's probably getting the Jacksonville job.
Joe Brady, Todd Monken. How many of those guys are also really good head coaches in 3 years?
Let's hope it's many with this Ben Johnson topping the list.
Well, and here's what's interesting is to watch this upcoming weekend. You got 2 defensive head coaches and 2 offensive head coaches who actually make it to the Super Bowl.
That's true. Well, is Sirianni technically an offensive coach? I know he's got an offensive background, I guess, but Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator there, right?
Yeah, he's the OC. It's not really it's Kellen Moore's offense per se, but
he's calling plays too, right? So that's
he is.
I do think Sirianni came up on the offensive side of the ball. So
I'm gonna cross-reference that list with find out which of them coach tight ends, and then that's how I'll rank them. That's my new thing. I'm like, ooh,
there you go. I like that a lot. I mean, that's the first I've really heard that considered. So that's good. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's look at some positives.
Yeah, we can't end like that.
All right. Let's look at the reasons why he will work. Everything that I've read about this guy, he comes from a family of mathematicians, so Justin will like that.
Love it.
Yeah, Bob.
He is extremely analytical. So here's the thing. When they are running certain plays in certain situations, like when you have a Hail Mary expected, but you still have time on the clock that you can run a quick play and get out of bounds, he's not going to allow his defense, even as an offensive coach, I can't imagine he's going to let his defense play that soft and allow a 15-yard gain that sets them up for a Hail Mary to lose. Those types of situations I think are not going to happen as often. And if they do, I think he's going to take accountability for it and say, look, these are the reasons why we did it. It didn't work out. Let's move on.
I also, to add on that, and I'm projecting a lot here, but I believe he's going to be aggressive in 4th downs, which actually allows you to call your 3rd downs a little differently. If you know we're the type of team that, no, we're pushing it. We're pushing the envelope. Will it work? I'm sure there's times that'll happen and he's being grilled, but I like it. You see it in the playoffs that we're watching. It's not that you're playing not to lose, you're playing to win. And it's our ball right now, and we're going to keep it that way. So
and I love the playing to win as long as the numbers support it, right? We're not being reckless. We're not just going for it on 4th down just because we want to go for it on 4th down. It's not an emotional going for it. If there's analytics and numbers that back up that say we should go for it, then you should go for it, right? Like there's no reason every NFL coach shouldn't. When you're watching Thursday Night Football on Amazon, right? It comes up right away, the go for it analysis, right? Every coach should have a chart like that. Like, but obviously the Eberflus didn't, right? Like lots of coaches just, it seems like it's an aggressive play because it's more conservative than traditionally things have been. But if there's numbers that back it up, then you should go for it. And I love hearing that that's the kind of guy that Ben Johnson will be.
And I don't have the data, but I'd be curious to see it. Since the touchback got moved to the 30, I feel like it's kind of lending you to being more aggressive already. Like, how many times are you just watching and a team really only had 1 or 2 decent plays, and all of a sudden they're like past midfield? So it's like, okay, we could risk it here. So anyway, keep going, Rob.
Yeah, so obviously the other one that you keep hearing, even from former players, now former, like Amon-Ra St. Brown had Caleb Williams on his podcast like a week ago. He asked Caleb what he wanted in a coach. Caleb described basically to a T what Ben Johnson was, kind of hinted that was who he wanted. And then St. Brown basically said that you don't want him. He's trash. He's garbage. Obviously, the only reason he's doing that is because he doesn't want to see his offensive coordinator leave. Why? Because he helped put him in position to be even better than he was. The guy has been, when he first started, he was almost strictly a slot receiver. Ben Johnson moved him around, got him involved in all different types of plays. I could see that for a DJ Moore next year, right?
Dunze?
Yeah, even a Dunze. I mean, again, just the details that he puts into everything, he's very, very detailed. Something that I felt like was the complete opposite of what we saw with Shane Waldron. I think the players are going to appreciate that, and I think it's going to work out in their favor.
Yeah, I love that. Attention to the detail, I think, is probably one attribute that would translate from offensive coordinator to head coach. That's something that just ingrained you. And I think that's something that we've seen with our head coaches here. Nagy was very guilty of it. Eberflus was guilty of it. Like these pre-snap penalties, right? And it's not just about, attention to detail. It's about teaching the guys, why they're supposed to be doing all this stuff and making sure that all of that is ingrained in them. So it's not even about remembering that you have to do this because coach said. It's like everyone's on the same page about why they're doing it that way. And then just naturally the penalties go away because everyone understands kind of what they're doing. So I love to see that.
I think the three of us are pretty knowledgeable about the game, but none of us are at that level of, coaches or players or things like that. But people who have combine all of our knowledge and people who have 10 times that are talking about this guy like he's going to make this transition very, very effectively. And so it could still not work. I'm never going to say that it's 100% guarantee that this is like the greatest hire of all time. But people who really know the game and know behind the scenes of what it takes to get a team to operate in a way that's winning football games are saying that he has those things. So, it's quite exciting. I think he's...
Yeah, I've heard all that same kind of stuff and from guys who you usually hear nothing but negative stuff about the Bears in particular coming from or saying really positive things about this guy. And that's why I'm kind of, willing to say now that, this isn't just chasing an offensive hire for the sake of an offensive hire. This is getting a football coach who's an offensive guy, which is really exciting.
Unless you're Dan Orlovsky or Chris Conti, because apparently those two guys just love to bash Chicago, and they absolutely hate this hire, and they don't think Caleb Williams and they don't think Ben Johnson mesh well together, and they think it was a big mistake, and Ben Johnson's going to go down in flames and never be a head coach again.
Yeah, well,
I didn't hear theirs.
Yeah. Stephen A. ripped Orlovsky this morning, and that's pretty funny because I'm not a big Stephen A. fan, but I put this on here. The play caller from the sidelines thing, I think, is kind of big. I think it's a little important because a lot of times you see offensive coordinators get these head coaching jobs, but they also want to maintain being a play caller. But a lot of them call plays from the booth. We kind of saw with Thomas Brown, right? Thomas Brown was doing a really good job doing the play calling from upstairs, being able to see the full length of the field, all that. And then he comes down and it's not quite the same. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to equate because obviously you have other things you have to think about now that you're the head coach and not just the play calling. But I think the fact that he's been a play caller from the sidelines this whole time is going to help him in that transition. He talks about how being able to see different angles, being able to read the cornerbacks, being able to maybe see some tells in what they're doing, and that leads to his adaptability on the play calls later in the game. That stuff is important, and it's things that I wouldn't have thought of until I heard these things over the last day or two.
Well, I don't think the only issue for Thomas Brown was coming down from the booth to the field, but I will give it some credence because he made a reference to it before it was done. Oh, I don't want to be the first ever, interim coach that coaches up from the booth. So, it was in his mind and it was a rather significant adjustment for him. So it's another thing to put in the positive column.
Yeah, and I love that you put that on here too, because it probably wasn't until the Thomas Brown thing where I kind of noticed it, and then I realized that's probably actually by design. I think that Ben Johnson. I'd like to go back and see what Ben Johnson did his first year in Detroit, whether he was in the booth or the sideline. But I wonder if he knew that my trajectory as a head coach, so I better get comfortable running plays from the sideline. So he just kind of went about it that way. But I think that's a great point to make that. He's already comfortable calling these plays where he's going to be as a head coach.
And the last one we already talked about, so we don't really need to go into more detail, but just the QB development. I mean, obviously, he came here wanting Caleb Williams. He's talked about how the sideline, being on the opposing sideline, he talked about it today. that he's seen how Bears fans are, and he loves the atmosphere. He loves, what this franchise has to offer. It's probably easier said than done. Than if he was an actual Bears fan for the last 40 years, he might not completely agree with that. But
I thought we were going back to the negative slide again.
We do have passionate fan base, right? I mean, it is a very passionate fan base, and if you can win them over, you have won for life. Mike Ditka obviously has lived off of that fame. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We have a lot to see what's going to happen. Again, the Bears have won the offseason. Let's just see how it actually plays out over the next year or two.
Yeah, the only thing with the development I will say is, he hasn't really worked with this young of a quarterback. Maybe I guess he had Tannehill in his second year in Miami, I guess, when he was more just a quality control coach, or maybe he was the tight ends coach. I'm not sure, but he really hasn't. Jared Goff had taken a lot of snaps at the position when Ben Johnson started working with him. So that's just something that it's not that I don't think Ben Johnson can work with Caleb Williams as a young quarterback, but it is a bit of an unknown. Well, see how that goes.
Ben Johnson is the best North Carolina quarterback that the Bears have ever had. So
take it. Yeah.
I was trying to see what he was coaching at that time.
Do you guys have anything else though to add that maybe I didn't get on the slide?
Tight ends.
I mean, I kind of joked about it on the previous slide. I wouldn't say joke. I thought it was something worth mentioning. But the fact that he wants to be here, I think, does say a lot. Yes, the alternatives were the Raiders, the Jaguars, and the Jets. Like there's not a lot to love about those franchises, but from those 45 seconds of that video today, you can see that he's a very serious, genuine person, and he seemed jacked up to be here, not just because he just signed a $72 million contract or whatever that's going to come to be. I mean, I think that he wants to be here. I think that has a lot to do with whether you're going to get, hit the ground running right away or not.
I totally agree with you, Bob, but now I have a different image in my mind of I just signed a check for that much money, and then what room will I walk in where I wouldn't be smiling? Like a whole pit of alligators, and I'm still just like...
Have the terms of that contract been actually, is it still all
I heard $13.6 million a year for 6 years or something.
So that was the first one that came out, and then I know, again, going with Gary Ross here, Gary Rappaport, but he said it's basically 15.
Now, I had heard that there's incentives too, so maybe it's like base 13.
Could be 13 with incentives to get to 15.
16, right? It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
And it's a 6-year deal, and we are going to assume, and it might not ever become public because they don't share this stuff like player contracts are shared, but it's assumed that Ryan Poles has also been extended to at least match up somewhat or the whole thing of his contract. We don't even know if Poles has 1 year or 2 year left on his deal. But the report came out that Flus had a 5-year deal. I don't know why Poles wouldn't have had a 5-year deal. If he did have a 5-year deal, you give him a 4-year extension. That means he's right in line. If it was 1, you gave him a 4-year extension. It means he's a year short. But
so I mean, we can get into a later episode, but the whole Poles dynamic is interesting to me. So I don't know how much in depth you want to go to. Should we just?
No, I mean the whole thing, in my opinion, is look. I was saying it for a long time. That everyone was like, you got to fire Ryan Poles. And my whole thing was, no, you just got to extend him. You just link them up. They're going to do the same thing they did when they brought in Matt Nagy and had Ryan Pace. They linked them up. They were tied together. You're going to do the same thing here. You're going to tie them together. Does that mean they're both going to be fired at the same time? Not necessarily. But it gives you a little bit of comfort knowing that you're locked in with the guy who you're trying to build this team with.
So that's almost why I would not extend Poles yet, though. He's got 1 year left. Like, Poles isn't going to make $22 million a year, right? Like, what do GMs make?
I have no idea.
Like,
probably less. I think they make less than coaches.
$1 million a year. You're not going to tie.
They still smile when they enter the room.
Tie if it turns out that this year's a disaster and they can't work together, you're not going to tie anchor to Ben Johnson's leg with the GM that he can't work with for the next 5 years. It's just not. I think maybe you do give it 1 year before the extension is signed, just to make sure that it works.
Well, I don't have very high levels of reporting. I hear things, and one of you can chime in on this, but from what I hear, they mutually like the idea of working with each other, if that makes sense. Like, because there was this idea that, remember, we were talking about what if the team wants to hire Ben Johnson. Right. Johnson doesn't want to work with Poles, but Poles is the one who has the final say on who they hire.
So that's kind of my point of this discussion too, right? Like if Ben Johnson's the type of head coach who can command a $15 million a year contract, he's the type of head coach who can demand you get rid of your GM. So I do think that he is willing to work with Poles, and that's why he's here in the first place. But I still just think, like, even if Poles is extended, who's really the boss in that relationship? The guy making $3.5 million or the guy making $16 million? Right?
It's an interesting dynamic, and a lot of teams have to deal with it, but it's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
I mean, so the Raiders tried to bring in a guy from Detroit. They brought him in for an interview. I can't remember his first name. Last name was Newsom. He'd been there for 26 years. And my whole pushback on that was, why are you bringing a guy in who's been with the Lions for 26 years, who hasn't achieved anything until the last two and clearly wasn't a part of the last two? That just makes zero sense to me, even if that is trying to get Ben Johnson to go there. If you're going to bring someone in, you go after Ray Agnew, who's their assistant GM over there, who's only been there since 2021, the same time frame as you've seen this team turn around. My guess is Agnew wanted nothing to do with the Raiders.
Yeah, if only as a ploy to maybe get Ben Johnson. So
I think it was just a way to get more money. I mean, it was just a ploy to get his name in front of other coaches or on other franchises. And, there's reports that he wanted this job last year, before Eberflus was even fired. So.
All right, well, we could probably kind of wrap this up, though. I do want to wrap it up. Well, you guys can respond, but Rob, I just want to give you you got to be pretty happy right now. You got your hand-picked GM. Even though you love Justin Fields, you got your hand-picked quarterback, you got your hand-picked coach.
This is the first time.
It's all coming up, man.
If this succeeds, I should be running the Chicago Bears. Because I called Poles out before they hired him. I wanted Ben Johnson. And I said, even though as much as I love Fields, I wanted Caleb Williams because I felt like he was a better prospect. So if this works out, I'm putting my resume in.
Can't hurt. Like I said, those checks, I mean, Bob, even the GMs, they smile when they walk into rooms.
Oh, yeah, I'm 100%. To play real fantasy football, you're a millionaire. That's all right.
All right. Exciting times, guys.
It is.
100%.
So until then, you guys, again, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave comments. What do you think about the hire? Is there someone else you wanted more? I don't know if I've put it out here, but Ben Johnson was my number one. Ted Monken was my number two after Vrabel went. And Mike McCarthy was actually my number three. So we'll see how things shake out with other teams and how those coaches do. But yeah, there's a lot to be excited about. There's a huge offseason coming up. Still 3 more games of this season to go through. And then
you excited me with the Trey Smith news. And now knowing Ben Johnson's a part of this, it makes me look at the draft a little different. So
yeah. All right. Well, until next time, everybody bear down, claws up. Eagles for everyone!